My love affair with Wagner began when I was a child, and first heard his music on my father's gramophone.
It was the overture to Tannhäuser, one of his earlier operas, and it did something most extraordinary to me. I've always loved music. I've always been hopeless at performing it. Couldn't really play an instrument, certainly can't sing, but it's made me do things inside. It's released forces within me, and no music has done it like Wagner's.
Over the years, my relationship with Wagner's music has grown deeper and stronger, but also more complicated. Because it's no secret my passion was also shared by him. And some people believe it even inspired his terrible crimes. I'm Jewish, so those are hard facts to face. And there have been times when I've wondered if I ought really to love Wagner at all. This is the story of what happened when I traveled to the home of the world's most controversial composer, to immerse myself in his music and salvage it, if I could, from its dark and troubled history. I'm in Bayreuth, in Bavaria, southern Germany. They call this the Green Hill, and at the summit sits a legendary theatre.
Well, for anyone who loves Wagner as I do, this place is Stratford-upon-Avon, Mecca, Graceland, all rolled into one. Bayreuth, the home of the Bayreuth Festival Theatre. And I'm here for the first time in my life. It's what I've always dreamed of doing. Oh, look, ticket office.
The Bayreuth Festival is exclusively dedicated to the music of Richard Wagner, who wrote 13 operas during a turbulent career. I've received a rare invitation to go behind closed doors as the new season takes shape.
Oh, it's fabulous. You don't often get a chance to see this.
There's so much to look at, but only one place to start, and that's with the music.
Wow, this is amazing. Lucky beggars.
As always, the centerpiece of this year's festival is the Ring Cycle, 4 epic operas inspired by Germanic myth.
Guten Tag, Valkyren.
This is a rehearsal for the second of them.
Valkyrie, second act. Just the second act.
The whole cycle runs to around 18 hours, performed over 4 nights. I can't think of another composer who's written anything as ambitious as that before or since. I suppose this must be the most famous Wagner tune of them all. But I think it's a pity if you only experience his music in bite-sized chunks. Because he was more than a composer. He was a musical dramatist too. And if you separate the music from the drama, you miss so much of the magic. Although even in this rough and ready form, it's enough to send a shiver up the spine.
Just fabulous to see this. The score sounds so funny on the piano. It almost sounds like silent film music at times when he's racing along, and then out comes that famous theme.
I'm fulfilling a lifetime's ambition by coming to the festival house, just as Wagner fulfilled his by building it more than 130 years ago. It's still driven today by the ideals which inspired him. And dedicated to the highest standards of performance and production.
Even the boxes are Wagnerian. I'm not sure if I was allowed in.
I'll explore more of the festival house later. But to understand why it exerts such a powerful hold on those of us who love Wagner's music, you need to know more about the trajectory which brought him to Bayreuth at the climax of his colourful career. It's a million miles away from the type of theatre where he started out. They were more like this place, which was built in the 18th century, in the days when opera was even more elitist than it is perceived to be today.
This is everything Wagner detested about opera, a place to show off, to be seen, a place to whisper and talk and stare across at your rivals and neighbours and all the snobbery and nonsense that still pertains in so much of opera, of course. Wagner hated all that. It's funny, you've got to admit it's funny.
By his early 30s, Wagner had worked as music director in a string of places like this. He'd also completed 6 operas, including Tannhäuser, the work which first ignited my passion for the music. But his radical ideas weren't confined to the stage. In 1848, he was working as musical director in Dresden's royal court. This was a year of political revolutions in Europe, and Wagner soon joined the struggle. He fought on the side of the left-wing nationalists who wanted to topple the princely German states and replace them with a unified nation. When the uprising failed, he found himself a wanted man with a price on his head. He fled here to Switzerland, and inspired by the landscapes near his Zurich home, he plotted a theatrical revolution to breathe new life into an ancient tradition.
He believed the greatest art form that mankind ever had was Greek tragedy, because Greek tragedy encompassed all the arts of acting, verse, music, dance, costume, spectacle, chorus. But more than that, it involved the whole community, all people. It wasn't a snobbish, elitist thing. It was a ceremony, a celebration. But more than that, it was a religious ceremony. And on top of that, too, its subject matter was myth. And Wagner believed very passionately that the very nature of myth was universal, because it was outside time. It wasn't about the bourgeois or the aristocracy. It wasn't stories of love affairs in history. It was outside time, almost like science fiction, but science fiction set in the past, if you like. It could speak to everybody, whatever their condition. So his revolutionary idea was to have what he called the total work of art, the Gesamtkunstwerk, and that therefore the word opera was pointless. He hated grand opera with its flounces and its absurd trills and ornaments. Obviously, at its greatest, like Mozart, he venerated it. But he wanted to cleanse the theatre and cleanse art of all this nonsense, and to get back to the elementals and to make a theatre for the people, which was music and dance and drama and everything. And he was going to be the one to create it, and he was going to be responsible for all aspects of it. And he put this together in an essay he wrote here in Switzerland, which was about the future work of art. And it was a future work of art that he was to make into a present work of art, the Wagnerian music drama.
To bring to life his utopian ideas, Wagner conceived of an opera about the mythical dragon-slaying hero Siegfried. Over time, his plans grew more ambitious. Instead of one opera, he would write 4. The Ring Cycle. An epic exploration of the conflict between our appetite for power and our hunger for love. The drama's set in motion by a struggle for control of a magical ring, which grants its owner unimaginable power, but only if they renounce love. It would take more than 20 years for Wagner to realize his grandiose dream with the Bayreuth premiere of The Ring Cycle in 1876. In the meantime, Wagner, exiled and penniless, had more prosaic concerns to deal with. In Zurich, he was fortunate to meet Otto and Matilda Wesendonck, a married couple whose fabulous wealth was matched by their enthusiasm for his talent.
He took a shine to Matilda immediately and took an even bigger shine to Otto's money. Yes. He was writing to friends about it within just a few weeks. Really? He'd met this rather nice woman with this very, very wealthy husband.
Wagner was a married man, although his relationship with his wife, Minna, was tempestuous. He had enjoyed his share of affairs over the years, but his infatuation with Matilda Wesendonck had a special intensity. No one knows exactly what went on behind closed doors here, but it's clear that the relationship fired Wagner's creativity. He wrote music inspired by her poetry, including a piece which later evolved into one of his greatest operas.
On the 23rd of December, 1857, Wagner performed a song of Matilda Wesendonck's that he dedicated to her called Träume, Dreams. He orchestrated it, and we're about to hear it in exactly the room it was first performed. Maestro.
Wagner's Swiss exile was a period of intense creativity. But here, as elsewhere in the story, a shadow falls across his sublime music. It's not only the fact that it was later appropriated by Hitler which makes some people think Wagner's art is tainted. It's also because Wagner himself was outspokenly anti-Semitic. In Switzerland, he wrote an article called Jewishness in Music, which still blemishes his reputation to this day.
It is ornamented with some genuinely revolting pieces of anti-Semitism. He talks constantly about a kind of, at a physical, visceral level of repulsion, instinctive repulsion that we feel towards the Jews. So there is a real anti-Semitism in that sense of literally, as people to be in a room with, they are revolting.
Anti-Semitism back then, of course, wasn't associated with the Holocaust. It was socially acceptable in a way that we couldn't imagine today, thankfully. But Wagner was by no means alone.
Anti-Semitism was widespread in 19th century Germany, even amongst political liberals like Wagner. It was linked to the rise in German nationalism, which saw the Jews, as so often in history, cast in the role of alien outsiders. But Wagner's outburst had a personal dimension too, fueled by his jealousy of the celebrated Jewish composers Mendelssohn and Meyerbeer.
Mendelssohn and Meyerbeer, they had money, they had success, they had nice lives. Wagner was small, ugly, virtue destitute, and he wanted to vent his anger on someone, and the two most natural people happened to be the two most successful people he'd ever known. There are some people that believe, and I tend to agree with them, that Wagner needed to create some kind of major disturbance in his life. He needed some kind of weird kick to get him going.
He needed an enemy, perhaps. He needed
an enemy, something or other, or an enemy within himself. He needed to disturb, he needed to muddy the waters around him in order to write the music that he did.
I have this fantasy, it's typically pathetic and typically a fantasy, so very me, in which I go back in time as an Englishman and I write letters to Wagner. I keep writing saying, I have to talk to you. And I say to him, listen, you're on the brink of becoming the greatest artist of the 19th century, and future generations will forget that simply because of this nasty little essay that you're writing and because of the effect it'll have. Unless, you know, I can think, what would he say to that? If he had known that the person who was most hurt by his anti-Semitism was himself. It isn't easy to confront Wagner, is it?
No, it's not. It's often very unpleasant.
Yeah.
But just because he may have been a nasty little man and a nasty anti-Semite doesn't mean that his music is not as supreme as it is.
I agree with Chris, although there are many music lovers who don't. For them, the music will always play second fiddle to Wagner's obnoxious political views, even when the music is as exquisite as this. If this sounds familiar, that's because it grew out of Träumer, the orchestral piece we've just heard. It's part of the love duet from Act 2 of Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde. In 1857, he abandoned work on The Ring to focus on this new composition, the story of a forbidden love affair between the knight Tristan and Isolde, who is betrothed to another man. It's based on ancient legend, but the music is strikingly avant-garde, pushing at the boundaries of conventional harmony. And it all starts with this. The so-called Tristan chord. It may not look revolutionary, but it must have astonished the first audiences who heard it 150 years ago. Because rather than progressing to a harmonious resolution as musical tradition expected, it evolves into another unresolved discord instead. Back in Bayreuth, I've come to the house where Wagner once lived to find out more about the cluster of notes which opened the door to modern music.
Stefan, have you got a spare right hand? Hi, you're playing on Wagner's piano. This was given to him, I can see, as a...
This is a pretty good piano, a gift from the Steinway factory to Richard Wagner in 1876.
to celebrate the beginning of
the festival?
Yeah. Will you let me just try and play the...
Of course.
The famous chord. I'm not going to do any more than that, but this chord here, I want you to explain why it's... it's the first chord of Tristan in the Prelude, but... Yes. I'm playing the Tristan chord on Wagner's own piano. Yes. I have to pinch myself to see that I'm not dreaming.
Yes, very important.
There it is.
The famous...
Yeah. What come with the other two notes? Oh, that's it, they're there on the E and the A flat, that's it.
Yes.
This chord, if someone was to look it up on Wikipedia, they'd find a huge entry just on this chord. What is it about this chord?
It's a chord of tension, of longing. Yeah. The first voice goes up, like you played,
yes,
right?
That longing,
and the other voices go down. So this is a depression. And this at the same time.
This is where Wagner's genius as a composer merges with his brilliance as a dramatist. His music keeps you on the edge of your seat, waiting for the moment when the dissonance of those opening chords will be resolved. In the second act, it seems as if the moment has finally arrived when the would-be lovers meet to consummate their passion.
It sounds vulgar, but it really is a coitus interruptus in the Liebesnacht, the great duet, where you think it's going to arrive then, don't you? Yes. And then in comes...
It's very erotic music.
Rette dich Tristan happens. And it's as if people are literally in bed with each other and they are actually making love, and just as the climax is about to arrive, bang, someone comes in and...
And then...
Rette dich Tristan!
It's interrupted.
Exactly. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Interrupted.
It's such a moment, isn't it?
Yes. Now I show you the non-interruption, the transformation.
Finally, after 4 hours of some of the most glorious, gut-wrenching music ever written, the psychological drama set in chain by that famous opening chord reaches its tragic climax.
Lust, isn't it?
Now for the last time, the longing motif comes back. Chromatic scale going upwards. Leading.
Finally, that E is going to come
to transition to transcendence. Just a moment.
Oh, I've read the wrong note.
It's not so easy.
It's not.
The piano playing.
I get overexcited. But my goodness, to have been even a small part of it.
Yes.
You've made me the happiest man in Germany today.
There's nothing to say.
No, there is nothing to say. That's
It's,
exactly the point.
Extremely good music.
In 1860, Wagner's Swiss exile finally ended. He was 47 years old, and although his music had made him internationally famous, he still had enormous debts, thanks to his itinerant lifestyle and legendary extravagance. To raise money, he toured Europe as a conductor. In 1863, his travels brought him here, to St. Petersburg.
Ooh, look. I'm pretty sure, I don't have any Russian, but that must be the Russian for ring there, beginning with Kol. So there it is, Richard Wagner's tetralogy, The Ring and the Nibelung. And then the top right, Mariinsky Theatre.
The Mariinsky Theatre has always been a landmark building in Russian cultural life, famous for its opera and ballet. You might be more familiar with the name given to it during the Soviet period, when it was known as the Kirov. I've come here to watch preparations for a new staging of The Ring, masterminded by this man, Valery Gergiev, the Mariinsky's principal conductor and artistic director. It's a world away from the standard cliches that many people associate with Wagner. There are no horned helmets or Aryan ice maidens on show here. This production is inspired by the myths and legends of Gergiev's own homeland, northern Ossetia. It's a useful reminder that Wagner's work is open to endless reinterpretation, which is one definition of a masterpiece. But when Wagner worked here, he had no sets or costumes to worry about. The spotlight was all on his extraordinary music and his revolutionary conducting style.
I think it will be totally impossible to imagine the history of conducting without a figure like Richard Wagner. Not only because he was the one who decided to turn his back to the audience, which was a revolution, but also to control the orchestra this way and to get so much result from direct eye contact with the musicians.
Which is the thing you do as well, isn't it?
It's very difficult to describe in 2 words what is conducting or what is conducting Wagner operas. But the tempo is very important. There is a moment when you have to release all the power of orchestra. Then there is a moment when you have to support totally the voice or ensemble of voices on stage. And then there is a moment when you have to create a mysterious atmosphere. Without this mystery, Wagner is not Wagner.
I wondered if it was important for you to take the German out of Wagner, because to me he's an international composer and he doesn't belong to a country any more than Shakespeare or Beethoven belongs to a country. And I wondered if that's important to you.
I think it's a very interesting question, especially if we talk about the Ring. There is not once a mentioning of Germany or Deutschland. So I think it's a story of the world. And I think Wagner himself, being quite a smart man, he understood that the Ring is about greed, hatred, love. It's about nature, it's about power, it's about domination. It's not German. And it shouldn't be associated with the Nazis. Or
no, that's really important,
because
isn't it?
if we are able to do it after the Second World War, where this city was so destroyed, you know.
Incredible, yes.
That means any country can do it.
It's been good to come to St. Petersburg and look at Wagner from a different perspective. But one thing never seems to change. Wherever in the world his music travels, it always carries with it a heavy load of historical baggage. After his Russian success, Wagner was sounded out about taking over the directorship of the Mariinsky. He turned it down and returned home to Germany, where the money he'd made on tour was soon swallowed up by his huge debts.
By 1864, Wagner's life had reached its lowest ebb. He was no longer a young firebrand in danger of being imprisoned for his revolutionary politics. He was a 50-year-old in danger of being imprisoned for his simply astonishing debt. He'd written Tristan, but that had been declared unproducible by most people who had seen it or tried to rehearse it. His relationship with Mathilde Wiesendonck was over, his marriage was over, it seemed his career was over, all that bright promise. And how could he possibly give the world these preposterously ambitious music dramas? If he were to write a wish list, I suppose he'd come up with one thing. He would need someone so powerful, so extraordinarily rich, that they could write off his debts, they could build in the theatre he wanted, they could guarantee him the posterity that he knew his genius merited. But that would be asking for a miracle. On March the 10th, 1864, a miracle happened. Quite unexpectedly, Maximilian II, King of Bavaria, died. He left his opulent kingdom to his son Ludwig, a handsome, eccentric 18-year-old. And one of Ludwig's first actions on acceding to the throne was to send for his hero, the artist he most adored in all the world, Richard Wagner.
Wagner was so used to fleeing the debt collector that it was some time before the king's messenger tracked him down to pass on the good news. Ludwig was offering to pay off all his debts and bankroll his future work. And if that wasn't proof enough of his passion, he went on to build what must surely be the world's most extravagant fan letter, Schloss Neuschwanstein. It wasn't completed until 1886, 3 years after Wagner's death, so he never had a chance to wander through these extraordinary spaces, all inspired by his work. But he had something even better. With the king's blank cheque to work with, his lifelong dream of artistic freedom must finally have seemed attainable.
What a patron to have.
It wasn't all plain sailing from here. It never was where Wagner was concerned, and it would take another 10 years before he completed the ring cycle. He also needed a theatre fit to stage it in. This was the bait that brought him to Bayreuth. Do you remember it? The Baroque Rococo extravagance that is the Margraville Opera House. A helpful friend had suggested it might suit his needs. Some friend. But Wagner liked the rest of Bayreuth, which was conveniently situated in the heart of his royal patron's Bavarian kingdom. So, if the perfect theatre didn't already exist here, why not build one instead?
These are the original plans for the Festspielhaus,
Yes,
which are constructed by Otto Brückwald.
And there's, someone's written here...
Yeah, that's very nice. You
the
see...
Ornamenta Fort.
Yes.
Is that Wagner's hand?
Yes, this is original Wagner's hand. He got the plans from the architect, and you can see he had the idea to make some ornaments. And
Typical late
Baroque.
19th century kind of...
Yes,
yeah.
and Wagner wrote the Ornamenta Fort.
Yeah.
Away with the ornaments, yes.
Some of the cash came from Ludwig, the rest from private donations and subscriptions, and the city of Bayreuth gifted him the green hill to build upon. But there was another grand design for Wagner to complete before the festival could happen. The final installment of his 4-opera ring cycle.
There it is, he just takes it and writes it across.
Yeah.
Quite simple.
To remind what he's writing in. And this is the very famous beginning of the prelude.
All these horns and the first violins, the second violins, and the...
It's written very clearly.
It's beautiful.
Very, very beautiful.
So clear. You can't make a single mistake here, can you? Wow.
You slightly could conduct from the score.
Yeah, I couldn't, but
Well,
someone with musical
me
talent
too.
could. It's a great moment for me. I'm sure some people will think preposterous to get so excited about bits of paper and black on lines, but I see and hear worlds come out of these pages. Dum dum. Dum dum. Whole worlds, great worlds that have influenced me and moved me and that no other art has.
And here, under the last notes, he writes,
finished,
finished in
achieved.
Wahnfried on 21st of November, I'll say no more.
With a little exclamation mark.
It was more than 20 years since Wagner, penniless and in exile, had first conceived of his masterwork. Now, at last, the mountain was scaled and the ring cycle completed. 4 monumental dramas which reach their climax with Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods. And finally, after 4 years of building, he had the theatre of his dreams in which to stage them.
Ha! Here we are, memorializing the first ever performance of the ring cycle in the year 1876. Wish I'd been there.
The list of attendees for that first night, aside from the Kaiser, emperors, kings, chancellors, prime ministers, includes Bruckner, Grieg, Tchaikovsky, Saint-Saëns and Franz Liszt, the father-in-law. Karl Marx even booked a place, but there wasn't room for him in the hotel.
Here it is. My hand is on the door. I know you'll think I'm very overexcited, but if this is the temple, this is the Sancta Sanctorum, the Holy of Holies. This is the theatre itself. And I've waited all my life, really, to enter. I'm going to do it now. Whatever you think of Wagner's music, no one can deny this is one of the most revolutionary theatres ever built. For I would suggest the most revolutionary music ever written. It's fabulous, isn't it? It's much more classical than I expected. I'm so excited. These are quite famous because they're not known for their comfort. The ring cycle is about 18 hours, well, it depends, 17 or 18 hours of solid seating. And most people bring a cushion, I believe. I must remember to do that when it's my turn.
Everything about this theatre exists to serve the on-stage drama. Every seat has an uninterrupted view, and the acoustic is legendary. But there's one aspect of the design which really makes this auditorium truly unique. And if you don't immediately spot it, well, that's exactly the point.
This is where the orchestra is. The audience can't see a single one of them. They're all hidden. It's a unique system, and the whole idea is that there's this balance, because the music is just one element of the whole drama.
By hiding the orchestra, Wagner also ensured that no light would escape from here into the auditorium to distract the audience from the action on stage.
It's incredible. Nowhere else like it in the world.
Once the festival starts, this building becomes a restaurant for the theatre-goers, but until then, it serves as a rehearsal room. Today, they're working on Siegfried, the third opera of the ring cycle. It's an opportunity for the soloists to go through their paces backed by a full-scale Wagnerian orchestra of around 120 musicians. Not a job for the faint-hearted. Here's the boss, well, one of them anyway, Eva Wagner, the composer's great-granddaughter. She's recently taken charge of Bayreuth alongside her sister, Katharina. It must feel like inheriting the throne of a grand and rather idiosyncratic kingdom.
So this is your first month here almost. Do you ever get a chance to relax and think yet?
Not really yet. I think that will be probably after the festival when I have my holiday.
This is June when the whole thing starts building to an enormous climax.
Exactly.
Do you think he would be surprised that Bayreuth is still going strong and that people still, it's now what, 7 years waiting list for a ticket?
Surprised.
Do you think, or would he expect that? No, he knew he was going to live forever.
Course.
Yeah, he did,
I'm
didn't
sure. Otherwise, why should he have built it here?
It's true.
You know.
It's still astonishing, isn't it,
That is a very special thing about here, about him.
And so you know also that means it's a bit like being an aristocrat. You know that you are borrowing, as it were, your time from your children. You know what I mean? That they, or I don't mean literally your children, but the next generation and the generation after that will do new things.
You create something in you, in your mind, which is perhaps not.
No, you don't feel that.
No, I don't feel.
You don't feel the idea of posterity, as we would say in England, the future. No, you
not at the moment.
That's probably good. You get on with the present.
Okay.
That's really nice talking to you. It's fantastic. I
I
appreciate it. You are very.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
very busy. Thank you so
Bye.
much. Greatly appreciated.
Hey, but could you stay still or not?
Yeah, we'll be here for the next 3 days. So.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Flesh on flesh, I touched a Wagner. That's pathetic of me, but it's rather wonderful.
Wie die Wunder schließe, die mit ihm du schlugest, in Trauer und Trümmer, stürze die drückende Kraft.
I'm thoroughly enjoying myself in Bayreuth. All I want to do now is immerse myself in the music I adore and count down the days to the opening of the festival. But there's another character who can't be kept out of the story any longer. Even though for someone like me with Jewish blood in their veins, it would be simpler and so much happier if he'd never been a part of it all. Hitler fell in love with Wagner's music when he was a young man with dreams of becoming an artist himself. By the time he first visited Bayreuth in 1923, he had traded painting for politics. He came to meet this man, British-born writer Houston Stewart Chamberlain, who was married to one of Wagner's daughters. Chamberlain was a racist who championed Aryan supremacy and vilified the Jews. He saw in Hitler a man of destiny who would finish the job Wagner had begun by forging a new and culturally pure Germany. Long before he became Chancellor, Hitler was embraced by some in Bayreuth with open arms.
It wasn't a question of welcoming Hitler because, in a sort of cowardly custard fashion, he was the great leader of Germany and they didn't dare offend him. Quite the opposite. They actually pushed him forward. They supported him from a very early age. 1923 was just a few years after the First World War when Hitler was a nobody. He was a corporal who'd left the front and come to join the turmoil of post-war Germany.
That was just the beginning of a relationship between Hitler, some members of the Wagner family, and Bayreuth, which would cause lasting damage to the reputation of the festival house and to Wagner's music. I'd like to think it is possible to salvage it from all those dark associations, to rescue it from Hitler's grasp. But I also have to consider a more disturbing possibility. Are the qualities which first drew me to Wagner's music, its emotional force and directness, the same ones that made the music so apt for Nazi exploitation? To test that theory, I'm heading to Nuremberg, 50 miles south of Bayreuth. In the Middle Ages, this was the capital of the German cultural renaissance, the inspiration for Wagner's opera, The Mastersingers. Later, of course, it became the home of Hitler's infamous propaganda rallies.
Well, the thing is, Joachim, I'm familiar with the idea that whenever there's a, footage of the Nuremberg rallies with Hitler standing on that podium over there, usually someone has decided to play Wagner in the background. But you have theories that actually Wagner is more deeply embedded in the modern Nazi Nuremberg.
Yes, I think so. First of all, when you take all these party rallies that we had here, in the evening then there was a Festaufführung, a celebration of the Meistersingers of Nuremberg.
Right, one of Wagner's truly great operas.
Yes.
And they played that and then came here, didn't they, to this enormous, what was then, there were how many soldiers would be here?
I'm sure more than 100,000.
More than 100,000.
Yes, from all over Germany, they gathered here.
And the party faithful would have listened to the Meistersingers first.
In the evening they listened to the Meistersingers, and the next day...
here.
Yes, and they played it themselves. Hitler loved the Meistersinger. He loved to whistle the tunes to his guest. He could whistle all the tunes in the Meistersinger.
Oh, God.
Yes, he liked that.
Oh.
There's a certain scene that triggered in him, I think, that whole rally idea.
Yeah.
It was the third act. There you have all the guilds of Nuremberg marching onto the stage, and you have like costume masses carrying flags and their guild signs and symbols, and they're singing together. It's a wonderful scene, but it's definitely a political manifestation. And this is on the small stage of the opera, and then transferred or even translated into reality in this huge field here in Nuremberg.
So they perverted the style of Wagner, if you like, the emotional impact of the music and the grandeur and the spectacle, which does have an enormous effect on audiences who love Wagner. You do get turned into a jelly by the end of the evening.
Yes.
It's so extreme.
Yes. That was the first step. The second was that he thought one could teach the Germans to see the world in a way which you find in Wagner operas, in a dialectical way, that you have a protagonist and an antagonist, that you have a good and an evil, that you have like a Iago and a Desdemona, or in the Wagner case, it is Siegfried and the dragon. Now, if you have this in the opera, it is perfectly all right, because the opera needs the tension of drama between the good and the evil. But as soon as you turn it into reality, it becomes a devastating political fantasy and ideology.
Of course, a defender of Wagner like me, although I'm not a complete defender of Wagner, would say Hitler saw one side of Wagner, and we tend to see Hitler's side of Wagner. Because Hitler was such a huge figure in the 20th century, and because his taste for Wagner was so enormous, we tend to say, what did Hitler see in Wagner? And we look through Hitler's viewfinder at this enormous man and see one little area like that, instead of seeing the whole thing.
If Joachim's right, that makes Nuremberg the sinister descendant of Ludwig's castle Neuschwanstein, a monstrous example of the way Wagner's music inspires some men to tear down the boundary which ought to separate fantasy from fact.
The railing there surrounds on three sides the area known as the Führer's Kanzel, the Führer's podium, and that's where Hitler stood. And that's where tourists to this day stand. Others like me can't actually bring themselves to go there. I'm not being oversensitive, I don't think. I just don't like, it's in the same way I'm not very good at picking up guns. I can do it occasionally, but I don't think I want to put myself in that position. And I don't want to hedge around here. I am deeply uncomfortable in Nuremberg talking about Wagner. I realize how close to the Nazi fantasy world Wagner was, and how deeply stitched into Hitler's vision of the world. It's very difficult. I have to keep reminding myself, and I do it best by simply listening to the music, how unbelievably complicated, ambiguous, emotionally honest, raw, revolutionary, anti-fascist Wagner truly is.
I suppose I think of it like this. Imagine a great, beautiful silk tapestry of infinite colour and complexity that has been stained indelibly. It's still a beautiful tapestry of miraculous workmanship and gorgeous colour and silken texture. But that stain is real, and I'm afraid Hitler and Nazism have stained Wagner. For some people, that stain ruins the whole work. For others, it is just something you have to face up to. And here's a place, as storm clouds gather in Nuremberg. Here's a place to think about such things, I suppose.
The link between Wagner's music and the odious extravaganzas staged here is bad enough. Worse still are the stories of it being used as a psychological weapon in the concentration camps. There's conflicting evidence about how widespread the practice was, but no doubt that it happened. So there's one more person we need to hear from before I return to Bayreuth. In London, I'm meeting Anita Lasker-Wallfisch. When she was 18 years old, she became a prisoner at Auschwitz, where some of my own relatives were also held and killed. She was a cellist whose talent for music probably saved her life when she was recruited into the inmates' orchestra at the camp.
There was nobody there who played the cello. There had been somebody there who died. I don't know what would have happened if they still had a cello, then I wouldn't have been so important. And you know, I mean, I had typhus like everybody. I was half dead in the revier, as it was called, sort of the sick bay. I remember 2 Germans standing in front of my bed. We had to all get up and march naked in front of the people who would say yes or no in the revier.
Meaning that you're too sick to live?
Too sick to live, so you go, or you survive. And that is something that is engraved in my memory. This is the cellist. And they walked on.
You might think that playing in such terrible conditions would have corroded Anita's love for music. But you'd be wrong. After the war, she had a long and distinguished career as a professional cellist. And her family still keeps that tradition going today.
The Germans have destroyed a lot of stuff. Music, no.
Right, that's beautifully put. People have this idea that in the death camps that Wagner was playing in the background all the time, as it were. And I'm here talking to you as a survivor of one of the death camps, the most famous of them all, the dreaded and horrific Auschwitz.
Well, we certainly didn't play Wagner.
You did not?
No, we didn't play Wagner. First of all, you must realize what this band, or Kapelle as we used to call it, consisted of. You couldn't have played Wagner if you tried.
Right, Wagner does demand a big orchestra.
And you know, blowing instruments. I can't speak for the other camps, but I don't think Wagner was particularly played.
When I was a boy, if I played Wagner at the top of the house loudly. Yeah. It's from a Jewish family, Wagner. Must I play that? If your children played Wagner at the, in the attic here and loudly, would you think they were somehow... am I betraying my Jewishness by playing Wagner and liking him?
I think everybody has to come to terms by themselves. I would never forbid anybody to listen to Wagner. If it was the music without the drama, one wouldn't probably argue with it. But apart from the fact, I would never have the patience to sit for 5 hours and listen to so much noise. I know you love it, but...
I do.
But what happens to you when you sit there for 5 hours?
I'm taken into a world of heightened emotion and psychological depth, and it's really extraordinary. I find every time I see a Wagner piece, a music drama, as he would call it, an opera is the easiest way to call it, although it's as if it's absolutely new. So although they are very long, and I understand why 5 hours, it seems like a long time with people singing and standing in one place, singing and singing, or screaming sometimes. And yet because of what the music does underneath with the drama, it's as if it's an enormous conversation, and your mind goes on a journey of connecting all kinds of emotional states and all kinds of philosophical thoughts. I mean, I know it sounds so pretentious. I'm fully aware of how embarrassing it can be to try and explain.
Why do you have to listen to Wagner and Bayreuth, which is so somehow symbolic for everything terrible that has happened? Why can't you just sit at home and listen to the record?
That's a very good question. I think I've spent my life listening to the records and loving it. I've never been to Bayreuth. Wagner built the theatre specifically for it, and I suppose it's a way of completing a part of the sort of my life with Wagner as it's been. Maybe I'll be disappointed.
Well, you tell me when you come back what you felt like in there on the shrine.
Yeah. I mean, it's gosh, you've got me worried now. I mean, it is.
I'm sorry.
No, it's right. You should. I embarked on this whole project. I was kidding myself with an open mind, but I kind of thought, really, I'll just cruise through this, and I know people will put contrary points of view to me and say, well, yes, but and I've already got the answers, and I know why Wagner's the greatest genius who ever lived, and I don't need anyone to tell me to give any more pause to that than I already have. But there is much in what you say. So do you think I shouldn't go to Bayreuth? Do you think it's...
I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you any advice, Stephen, that you have to do that. You have to do that.
You're quite right.
Yeah, and I can't, no, I think, why not? I mean, maybe you'll decide never again, but you'll have experienced it.
When I first fell in love with Wagner's music, that love was unconditional. But what seemed simple as a child is not so simple anymore. This remarkable plot of ground will never be a neutral place, of course. For some, it's a shrine to one of the world's great geniuses. For others, it's a tainted reminder of dark days in Germany's past. Even this memorial bust was created by Hitler's favorite sculptor. But Wagner wasn't the first artist whose work was exploited by a tyrant. From the Caesars to the Medici, Stalin to Chairman Mao, the emotive power of great art, the very thing that persuades us to love it in the first place, will always make it vulnerable to exploitation by ruthless men. But Wagner's music is bigger and better than Hitler ever imagined it to be. And Bayreuth, the theatre Wagner dreamed of creating for so long, is also redeemed by that fact. Which is why I'm not prepared to surrender either of them to him.
Well, here it is. In my hand, one of the most valuable pieces of paper in the world of culture. The one thing I'd leave with is this thought. If you've never heard the music of Richard Wagner, if you've never encountered his dramas, I would urge you, because we're only on this planet once, to give it a try. I still believe, as firmly as I believe anything, that his work is important and is on the side of the angels. It is fundamentally good.